Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The sunset was a slash of fire and violet across the saw-toothed peaks embracing Iron Wheel Ranch. Thatcher Boone, a stark figure silhouetted against the fading glow, surveyed the vista from his cabin's porch. A cool breeze whispered through the pines, carrying the faint, wild scent and the distant growl of the Powder River. He inhaled deeply, the ember of his cigarette a stubborn spark against the encroaching night. The smoke wreathed his face, deepening the etched map of worry and long years. The ranch house, a sprawling testament built of rough-hewn logs, stood for aspirations realized and hopes extinguished, solid like him, reliable, yet burdened by a silent grief that permeated the very timbers. Thatcher flicked the cigarette butt into the dirt, grinding it under his boot heel. The ranch's quiet had become a familiar presence, almost a comfort, yet this night it pressed down on him with unusual weight. He'd grown used to the stillness after Martha was gone, and then the devastating loss of Caleb and his wife in that train wreck back east. The unexpected inheritance of Lily, his niece, had come with a host of burdens he never craved. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly, a single kerosene lamp casting a buttery light. Dust motes pirouetted in the beam, highlighting the simple furnishings. A worn leather armchair sat sentinel before the cold hearth, a silent witness to countless solitary evenings. Scattered newspapers lay like fallen leaves on the floor, their blaring headlines of a distant world unheeded. He found solace in the ranch's tranquility, a balm against the clamor of the outside. He moved to the window, his gaze tracing the ranch's vast boundaries. Fences, like ruled lines on a map, contained the cattle herds that were his lifeblood, his enduring preoccupation. He knew every hollow and rise of this land, each spring and grazing patch. He'd wrestled it from the wilderness, shaping it into something enduring, something real. But what was the purpose if there wasn't somebody to share it all? A distant pinpoint of light snagged his attention. The telegraph office in Redemption, a few miles distant. He wasn't anticipating any messages. Since his brother and sister-in-law's passing, correspondence had dwindled to a trickle. Old Man Hemlock, the telegraph operator, was probably just locking up for the night. But then, a lone rider detached from the light and spurred his horse toward the ranch. A coil of unease tightened in Patch's stomach. Bad news always arrived swiftly, especially in this country. He waited on the porch, arms crossed, his expression a weathered mask. The rider, a boy whose nervousness was palpable, reined in his mount before the cabin, dust swirling around them. "Mr. Boone?" the boy asked, his voice cracking with a trace of youth. "That's me," Thatcher rumbled, his voice gravelly from disuse. The boy wrestled a crumpled telegram from his saddlebag. "This just came for you, sir. Old Man Hemlock said it was important." Thatcher took the offered paper, his fingers momentarily brushing the boy's trembling hand. He unfolded it deliberately, his eyes scanning the terse message. "Arriving Redemption stagecoach tomorrow noon. Maggie Colton." The name sparked no recognition. He frowned, racking his memory. Had one of his hands been expecting kin? Unlikely. "Something wrong, Mr. Boone?" the boy ventured, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Don't know yet," Thatcher said, his voice low and thoughtful. He pressed a silver dollar into the boy's palm. "Thanks for bringing this." The boy's eyes widened at the glint of silver. He touched his hat brim and wheeled his horse around, vanishing into the darkness with surprising speed. Thatcher fixed his gaze on the telegram, the words swimming slightly in the gloom. Maggie Colton. Who was this woman? And what brought her to Iron Wheel Ranch? He turned and strode back inside, the telegram crumpled in his fist. He needed to consult with Mrs. Henderson, his housekeeper. He paid her handsomely to be in the know. He found her in the kitchen, humming a tuneless melody as she finished the dishes. The mingled scents of soap and stew hung in the air, a domestic tableau both comforting and faintly intrusive. He rarely set foot in the kitchen, preferring to remain separate from the daily rhythms of the household. Mrs. Henderson, he said, his voice slicing through the quiet kitchen sounds. The woman, a sturdy figure radiating warmth and practicality, turned, drying her hands on her apron. Yes, Mr. Boone. He extended the telegram. Know anything about this? A Maggie Colton arriving at the ranch? Mrs. Henderson took the paper and read it, her brow knitting together. Maggie Colton, oh, that must be the governess. Governess? Thatcher echoed, his voice edged with disbelief. What governess? The one you hired for Lily, Mrs. Henderson explained, her tone matter-of-fact. From that agency back east. I assumed you were aware. Thatcher stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. He recalled now, dimly, signing some documents weeks ago, something concerning Lily's welfare. He'd entrusted the entire arrangement to his lawyer in redemption, dismissing it from his thoughts. He didn't have the bandwidth for such affairs. A governess, a city woman, coming to his ranch. A wave of anger surged through him, laced with an unfamiliar anxiety. He hadn't solicited this. He had no need for a governess, for a woman to disrupt the carefully maintained equilibrium of his existence. He was perfectly capable of providing for Lily on his own. Or so he told himself. There's been some kind of mistake, he stated flatly. I never authorized this. Send a wire to redemption first thing. Tell her to turn around, go back where she came from. Mrs. Henderson regarded him, her expression unreadable. I don't think that's wise, Mr. Boone, she responded gently. Lily requires someone. She's been dreadfully lonely since her parents were taken. You can't simply send her away. Thatcher averted his gaze, his jaw tight. He knew Mrs. Henderson spoke the truth, but he resisted acknowledging it. He shrank from opening his life to anyone, particularly a stranger hailing from the city. He was accustomed to solitude, to confronting his burdens independently. He needed no help from anyone. I'll consider it, he said, his voice clipped. He turned and exited the kitchen, leaving Mrs. Henderson alone amidst the lingering aroma of stew and the clatter of dishes. He returned to the porch, the telegram still gripped in his hand. The moon had climbed high, painting long spectral shadows across the ranch. He surveyed the immense landscape, the silent hills, the infinite expanse of sky. This was his domain, his realm. He wouldn't permit anyone to alter it. Yet, as he stood there, alone under the cold light of the moon, he wrestled with the disquieting premonition that his life was about to be irrevocably changed. Maggie Colton was coming, and with her a maelstrom of disruption for which he felt profoundly unprepared. The relentless gears of fate were in motion, and Thatcher Boone bore the unsettling conviction that he was about to be crushed under their weight. City shoes on dusty ground, the stagecoach lurched to a halt, spitting dust and gravel outside the Iron Wheel Ranch. Maggie Colton, her tailored traveling suit coated in a fine layer of ochre, stepped gingerly onto the parched earth. She adjusted her spectacles, the wire frames glinting in the harsh sunlight. and surveyed the scene with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The ranch house, a sprawling structure of weathered wood and rough-hewn stone, stood silhouetted against the vast, unforgiving landscape. It was far grander than she'd imagined from the terse correspondence, yet possessed an undeniable air of desolation. A lone figure emerged from the shadowed porch, his silhouette slowly resolving into a man of imposing stature. Thatcher Boone. His face, etched with hard lines and shadowed by the brim of a worn Stetson, held no hint of welcome. He stood motionless, a silent sentinel against the backdrop of his domain. Maggie felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. This was not going to be easy. "Colton?" His voice was a low rumble, gravelly and devoid of warmth, like the stones scattered across the arid ground. "Mr. Boone," she replied, striving for a composure she didn't entirely feel. She extended a gloved hand, a gesture that seemed absurdly formal in this rugged setting. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on her outstretched hand, before reluctantly taking it in a brief, firm grip. His calloused hand swallowed hers, a stark reminder of the life that separated them. "You're late. The stage was expected hours ago." "We encountered difficulties," Maggie explained, retrieving her hand. "A broken axle. Then a flash flood washed out part of the road. It was unavoidable." Thatcher grunted, unimpressed. He gestured towards a waiting ranch hand who began unloading Maggie's trunk from the stagecoach. "Jed will take your things to the house. Lily's expectin' you." Maggie followed him as he turned and strode towards the house, her city shoes sinking slightly into the dusty ground. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, a far cry from the manicured gardens and perfumed air of Boston. She noticed the way Thatcher moved, a fluid, economical stride that spoke of a life spent in the saddle. His very presence exuded a raw, untamed energy that both intimidated and intrigued her. As they reached the porch, Maggie paused, taking in the details of the ranch house. The windows were small and deeply set, offering little respite from the relentless sun. The wood was weathered to a silver gray, scarred by years of harsh weather. It was a house that spoke of resilience and endurance, but also of isolation and hardship. Thatcher pushed open the heavy oak door and gestured for her to enter. The interior was dim, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke, and something else, a faint, lingering sadness. The main room was sparsely furnished with heavy, functional pieces. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. A small figure darted from the shadows, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Lily." She was a wisp of a girl, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her face smudged with dirt. She clutched a worn doll to her chest, her gaze fixed on Maggie with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "This is Lily," Thatcher said, his voice softening slightly, though still lacking any real enthusiasm. "Lily, this is Miss Colton, your new governess." Lily edged closer, her eyes never leaving Maggie's face. "Are you really going to teach me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I am," Maggie replied, kneeling down to meet the girl's gaze. "I'm very much looking forward to it, Lily. We'll read stories, learn about the world, and maybe even do some painting." A flicker of a smile touched Lily's lips, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. She glanced at Thatcher, as if seeking his approval. Thatcher remained impassive. "Show Miss Colton to her room, Lily. Supper will be served in an hour." He turned and walked towards a dark hallway, disappearing into the depths of the house. Lily took Maggie's hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Come on," she said, leading her towards a narrow staircase. "Your room is upstairs. It's small, but it has a window." As they climbed the stairs, Maggie had a chance to observe Lily more closely. She was thin and pale, with an air of quiet sadness that belied her young age. Maggie felt a surge of protectiveness towards her, a desire to bring some light and joy back into her life. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and a chair. The window overlooked the vast expanse of the ranch, a panorama of rolling hills and distant mountains. The view was breathtaking, yet it also underscored the isolation of this place. "It's lovely," Maggie said, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Lily." Lily shrugged. "It's the smallest room in the house, but it's quiet." She hesitated, then added, "Uncle Thatcher doesn't come up here much." Maggie unpacked her meager belongings, trying to ignore the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. She hung her few dresses in the small wardrobe, placing her books on the table. It felt surreal, setting up her life in this remote, unfamiliar place. As she changed into a simpler dress, Maggie gazed out the window, her thoughts swirling. She had come to Iron Wheel Ranch with a sense of purpose, a desire to make a difference in Lily's life. But she couldn't ignore the daunting reality of the situation. Thatcher Boone was a formidable man, hardened by grief and loss. He clearly resented her presence and viewed her as an unwelcome intrusion. And the ranch itself, it was a world away from anything Xiaoma had ever known. She knew that she had a difficult task ahead of her, but Maggie Colton was not one to back down from a challenge. She had faced adversity before, and she would face it again. She would win over Thatcher Boone, she would bring joy to Lily's life, and she would find her place in this harsh, unforgiving land. She had to. Her future depended on it. The dinner bell rang, a jarring clang that echoed through the house. Maggie took a deep breath and smoothed down her dress. It was time to face Thatcher Boone again. She descended the stairs, steeling herself for the inevitable clash of wills. City shoes on dusty ground. The image resonated, a stark reminder of the vast gulf that separated her from this world, and from the man who ruled it. Unbreakable will, the morning arrived with a stark, unforgiving light, bleaching the endless plains into a monochrome landscape of dust and pale grasses. Before the sun crested the horizon, Thatcher found Maggie wrestling with the recalcitrant stove in the kitchen, her efforts marked by a smudge of soot on her cheek and a determined set to her jaw. He leaned against the jamb, a silent sentinel observing her struggle. "Thought you'd caught the first stage east," he rumbled, his voice resonating in the large, empty space. Maggie, intent on her task, didn't acknowledge him initially. "Lily needs breakfast. She can eat with the other ranch hands." Finally, her gaze lifted, meeting his. Her eyes, a surprising cerulean against her grimy face, held firm. "Lily needs more than sustenance, Mr. Boone. She needs nurturing." A harsh laugh escaped Thatcher's lips. "Nurturing? From a pampered city girl fresh out of finishing school?" "I intend to try," she replied, her tone softening slightly, yet her resolve remained unyielding. "And I will succeed." Pushing away from the doorframe, he issued a challenge. "Right then, Miss Colton. If you aim to justify your presence here, the south fence line demands attention. Rattlers are thick as thieves this season." His scrutiny was intense, a flicker of something indecipherable in his gaze. Maggie hesitated, her eyes darting to the window and the vast, implacable expanse beyond. "My experience with fences is limited." A sharp, almost cruel note entered Thatcher's voice. Then you'll learn, or you'll find yourself on the next coach headed back from whence you came." He left her to the sputtering fire, his words hanging in the air. Maggie drew a steadying breath, hardening her heart. She would not yield, not to him, not where Lily was concerned. The day became an ordeal. Beneath the relentless glare of the sun, under the laconic supervision of Jeb, a weathered ranch hand, Maggie battled with coils of barbed wire and stubborn fence posts. Soon her hands were a landscape of scrapes and cuts, her clothing snagged and torn, her hair clinging to her scalp with sweat. Jeb, his patience surprising, demonstrated the proper use of the tools, his movements efficient and economical. He offered no comfort, nor did he voice derision. He merely observed, a silent arbiter. By dusk, she had managed to repair a modest section of the barrier. Imperfect? Certainly, but functional. Exhaustion weighting her limbs, she made her way back to the ranch house, where she discovered Lily perched on the porch, kicking her heels and sketching in the dust with a twig. Lily's face blossomed into a radiant smile. "Miss Colton, you're all covered in dirt." Maggie summoned a tired smile. "So are you," she responded, gently removing a streak of grime from Lily's cheek. "Uncle Thatcher mentioned you were patching up the fence." "That's right," Maggie acknowledged. "It's demanding work." "Uncle Thatcher always works hard," Lily said, her voice subdued. "He doesn't smile much anymore." A pang of sympathy resonated within Maggie. She gently tousled Lily's hair. "Perhaps we can alter that," she murmured. Later that evening, after bathing Lily and sharing a bedtime story, Maggie encountered Thatcher in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey. The room was dimly illuminated, the air saturated with the combined scents of aged leather and pipe tobacco. "Still here, I see," he observed, his tone devoid of inflection. Maggie maintained her ground. "Indeed, I am. The fence remains incomplete. I mended a portion of it." "A portion," he echoed, his lips twisting into a sneer of disbelief. "You deem that sufficient?" "It's a beginning," Maggie countered, her voice gaining strength. "And more than you anticipated, wouldn't you agree?" Thatcher took a deep draught of his whiskey. "I expected you to retreat, to scurry back to your pampered existence in the city." "My life wasn't particularly pampered," Maggie stated, her voice dropping. "And I don't shy away from challenges, Mr. Boone." "Then you're a fool," he snapped. "This isn't some parlor game, Miss Colton. This is a harsh existence. And it breaks people." "It broke He faltered, his jaw tightening. "It broke your heart," Maggie finished softly. Thatcher slammed his glass onto the desk, the sound sharp in the confined space. "Get out." "No," Maggie declared, her resolve ringing clear. "I'm not going anywhere. Lily needs me. And I refuse to abandon her simply because you're too obstinate to acknowledge it. You presume to know what Lily needs?" He roared, his eyes blazing with barely suppressed rage. "You've known her for a mere 48 hours. "I recognize she needs someone who cares," Maggie retorted, her own anger now ignited. "Someone who will listen, laugh, and make her feel secure. You may provide for her material needs, Mr. Boone, but you are failing to provide what she truly craves." Thatcher's face was a stony mask of fury. "You dare to lecture me about my own niece?" "Yes, I dare," Maggie exclaimed. "Because someone must. You're so consumed by your personal grief that you are blind to the vulnerable little girl who is right before you, pleading for your affection." The ensuing silence was thick and heavy. Thatcher's chest heaved, his knuckles bone white as he gripped the edge of his desk. Maggie stood firm, her own heart hammering. but her gaze unwavering. Finally Thatcher spoke, his voice barely audible. "Get out," he repeated, but this time a tremor underlay the words. Maggie turned and exited the study, leaving Thatcher alone in the darkened room. She sought solace in Lily's room, sitting vigil by her bedside, listening to the child's gentle respirations. The confrontation with Thatcher had unnerved her, but it had also fortified her determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not allow him to crush Lily's spirit. She would remain and fight for both of them, even if it meant confronting the full force of Thatcher Boone's unyielding will, because she sensed, deep within, that beneath the frigid exterior, a faint ember of warmth, a glimmer of hope, lay dormant, awaiting reawakening, and she was resolved to be the catalyst that transformed that ember into a roaring flame. A spark of kindness, the glow from the kerosene lamp, painted the small room in shades of amber. Maggie, perched beside Lily's bed, held open a dog-eared Heidi. Her voice, a soothing balm, chased away the oppressive quiet that had become Lily's unwelcome companion. Outside, the wind clawed at the ranch house, a wild beast rattling the window panes, yet within the room a fragile tranquility bloomed, a haven against the plain's desolate reach. Maggie narrated tales of soaring peaks and the simple pleasures of tending goats, her voice weaving vibrant tapestries in Lily's imagination. Beneath the worn patchwork quilt, Lily, her eyes wide and luminous, absorbed every syllable, a beloved threadbare teddy clutched tight in her small fist. A sense of serenity, of safety, she hadn't known in what felt like forever. Usually, bedtime was a brisk affair, a hurried tuck-in courtesy of Mrs. Henderson, followed by endless hours spent staring into the dark, listening to the house groan its lonely lament. Maggie paused, turning the page. And then, she confided, lowering her voice, Heidi stumbled upon a hidden glen, a riot of wildflowers where she could whisper secrets to the wind and converse with the birds. Lily stirred, glancing down at her intertwined fingers. "We don't have glens," she murmured, her voice a mere breath against the wind's howl. "Just dew dust devils and cattle." Closing the book, Maggie placed it gently on the nightstand. She reached for Lily's hand, her own, marked by the grit of city life, offering unexpected solace against the child's silken skin. "Never underestimate what might be concealed, Lily. The most breathtaking wonders often lie tucked away in the most unexpected corners." Lily lifted her gaze, scrutinizing Maggie's expression. "Are you going away?" she asked, the question barbed with a fear that resonated deeply within Maggie. "Like Mama did?" The unspoken question hung between them, a palpable weight. Maggie's breath caught. She hadn't braced herself for this naked vulnerability. Thatcher had outlined the ranch's harsh realities, the isolation, but failed to capture the quiet ache imprinted on the girl's features. "No, darling," Maggie replied, her tone resolute, unwavering. "I'm staying right here. I promise. I'm here for you." Gently, she brushed a stray lock from Lily's brow. "Tell me, what sets your heart aflutter?" Lily hesitated, then barely whispered, "Drawing. But Uncle Thatcher says it's a waste of good paper." Maggie frowned, her brow furrowed. "A waste? Lily, drawing is anything but. It's a window to the soul, a way to voice stories without uttering a single word." She offered a warm smile. "We will unearth paper aplenty, and crayons, the whole rainbow, every hue you can conjure." Lily's eyes ignited. A fragile ember of hope sparked to life. "Truly? Truly," Maggie affirmed, gently squeezing Lily's hand. "And perhaps, just perhaps, We'll even unearth that secret glen together. A faint smile graced Lily's lips, the first genuine expression Maggie had witnessed since arriving at Iron Wheel Ranch. Maybe, she breathed, burrowing deeper under the covers. Could you sing me a psalm? After a moment's thought, Maggie began a simple lullaby, her voice clear and tender, weaving a tapestry of comfort and solace around the little girl. Unseen, unheard, Thatcher lingered in the dim corridor, braced against the wall. Restlessness he couldn't define had drawn him to Lily's room. He'd anticipated finding her either slumbering or lost in the abyss of her thoughts. This, however, was a revelation. He observed Maggie, her face gilded by lamplight, her voice filling the void with a tenderness he hadn't encountered in years, if ever. He noted the way Lily regarded her, a blend of nascent trust and adoration, a yearning for connection that echoed his own, masked beneath layers of sorrow and resentment. He detected the genuine warmth radiating from Maggie's spirit, the gentle caress of her hand, the unyielding pledge in her cadence. He beheld a woman embodying everything he was not, empathetic, nurturing, capable of affection. He'd initially perceived Maggie as an unwelcome disruption, a pampered city dweller out of her element, a threat to the fortified barriers he'd erected around his heart. He'd attempted to discourage her, to erode her resolve, to shield himself from the vulnerability she represented. Yet now, witnessing her with Lily, a pang akin to remorse washed over him. He'd been so consumed by his own torment, his personal tragedy, that he'd been blind to the anguish etched in his niece's gaze, the isolation that had enveloped her, and he'd demonstrably failed to recognize the fortitude and compassion emanating from this unexpected caregiver. As the melody faded, a restful quiet descended. Thatcher saw Lily's eyelids were sealed, her breathing rhythmic and deep. Maggie meticulously tucked the quilt tighter, then turned to depart. She noticed him then, a figure cloaked in shadow, his features inscrutable. Her stride faltered, her heart pounding against her ribs. She hadn't anticipated his presence, his eavesdropping. He straightened from the wall, his eyes meeting hers. Something was altered in their depths, a hint of, what? Gratitude? Remorse? Maggie struggled to decipher it. She hasn't slept so peacefully in moons, he acknowledged, his voice a raspy murmur, barely audible. Maggie nodded, mute, her throat constricted with emotion. He shifted his weight, his hands clenched at his sides. Thank you, he ground out, the words sounding stilted and unfamiliar on his tongue. Maggie managed a wan smile. She's a remarkable girl, Thatcher. She just needs someone to truly see her. He looked past her, towards Lily's slumbering form. A muscle pulsed in his jaw. She reminds me of her mother, he said, his voice laced with grief. Too damn much. Maggie drew closer, her tone gentle. I understand it's arduous, Thatcher, but Lily needs you. She needs you to be her father, her mother, her everything. He met her gaze, his eyes mirroring a pain almost too profound to bear witness to. I'm at a loss, he confessed, the words stark and honest. Maggie closed the distance between them, her hand extending, hovering for a heartbeat before resting lightly on his arm. I can lend a hand, she offered, her voice brimming with compassion. We can assist one another. He glanced down at her hand upon his arm, then back to her face. For the first time since her arrival at Iron Wheel Ranch, he recognized not an adversary, but a potential ally. A spark ignited within him, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of perhaps, just perhaps tenderness. He didn't recoil. Lessons in patience the afternoon sun, a painter of golden hues, striped the porch floor where Thatcher stood, his usual severity tempered by a flicker of something akin to awe. Inside, framed by the window, Maggie sat with Lily at the time-worn kitchen table, a small mountain of books her backdrop. Lily, perched on a stool, wrestled with a stubborn pencil, attempting to form letters. "The B needs a curve, sweetie," Maggie murmured, her voice a soothing melody against the quiet. She gently corrected Lily's grip, molding the letter with her own hand. "Like this. See the roundness?" Lily's small brow knit together in fierce concentration. She erased the offending stroke and tried once more. Thatcher recalled his own childhood lessons, delivered with clipped impatience and an impossible standard. He hadn't possessed even a trace of Maggie's forbearance. No, it ran deeper. A bedrock conviction in Lily's potential. A quiet encouragement that blossomed like a hidden spring. "Yes, there you go." Maggie's soft clap was a burst of sunshine. "Perfect! Now, let's spell cat." He shifted from the post, drawing closer despite himself. He could discern Lily's tentative voice, gaining strength with each syllable as she sounded out the word. C-A-T. Cat. A ghost of a smile played on Thatcher's lips. He hadn't witnessed such unadulterated joy on her face since before the accident had dimmed her spark. His thoughts drifted back to Maggie's arrival, his initial resentment at her citified attire, and her polite yet unwavering determination to take charge. He'd viewed her as an unwelcome intrusion, a stark reminder of his inadequacy. Now, seeing her unlock his niece's spirit, a reluctant respect began to blossom. He drifted back to the porch, sinking into a rocking chair. The familiar creak and sway, once a solace, now felt like a subtle taunt. He'd always taken pride in his resilience, his ability to weather any storm alone. But he'd done it by entombing his grief, allowing it to calcify him. Maggie, with her tranquil strength and boundless empathy, offered a different path, one that demanded vulnerability, and that prospect chilled him. Later, after Lily was tucked away in slumber, Thatcher found himself in the kitchen with Mrs. Peterson, enveloped in the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread. "That Miss Colton's doin' wonders for the girl," Mrs. Peterson observed, her focus on the pliable dough. Thatcher offered a grunt in reply, not yet prepared to voice what he knew to be true. "Lily's laughin' again," she continued, her voice tinged with emotion. "Haven't heard that sound in ages." Thatcher poured himself coffee, the silence hanging heavy between them. He understood that Mrs. Peterson's words extended beyond Lily. They encompassed the pervasive gloom that had settled over the ranch, the emotional barricade he'd constructed. "She's patient," he conceded finally, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. Mrs. Peterson chuckled, a warm, earthy sound. "Patient? That's one way to put it. I reckon she's got a heart as wide as this entire state." She paused, her gaze meeting his squarely. "And Lily ain't the only one in need of a little warmin' up, Thatcher." He met her knowing look, his jaw tightening. He recognized the undercurrent in her words. He'd caught Maggie's gaze on him at times, a blend of concern and something elusive that he couldn't define. He didn't deserve her kindness. He considered himself irreparably broken, incapable of offering her what she deserved. "She'll be leaving soon enough," he said, his voice raspy. "Once Lily's settled." Mrs. Peterson scoffed. "You honestly think she's the type to bolt at the first sign of trouble? That gal's got backbone, Thatcher. More than you give her credit for." He offered no response. He knew she spoke the truth. Maggie wasn't like the others, easily intimidated by his gruff demeanor or deterred by the ranch's remoteness. She was different. She was resilient. He finished his coffee in silence, the weight of Mrs. Peterson's words pressing down on him. He knew he couldn't perpetually maintain his distance from Maggie. He couldn't ignore the transformative effect she was having on Lily, on the ranch, on himself. Later, lying in bed, staring into the inky blackness of the ceiling, he pondered Maggie's patience. He recalled her gentle guidance of Lily's hand, shaping the letters, urging her to persevere. He'd never possessed that kind of gentle persistence. He'd always expected immediate results, for things to yield to his will. But life defied such expectations, and so did people. He closed his eyes, a nascent thought taking root. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could learn something from Maggie. Perhaps he could cultivate patience. Perhaps he could strive to become better, for Lily's sake, and perhaps, if he dared to dream, for his own, and maybe, just maybe, for Maggie as well. Ghosts of yesterday, the lingering fragrance of pine, still clung to Thatcher, a faint echo of his morning trek into the woods, a futile attempt to escape the memories nipping at his heels. He slunked on the porch swing, Lily slumbering peacefully inside, Maggie's silhouette a welcome presence against the lamp-lit window. He knew propriety demanded he offer her tea, perhaps even engage in a conversation that ventured beyond their practiced polite exchanges regarding Lily's development. But the porch held him fast, the swing's rhythmic groan a somber descant to the cricket's chorus. He was imprisoned, not by the encroaching darkness, but by the spectres of the past. Closing his eyes, the years evaporated. He wasn't the weathered rancher now inhabiting his skin, but a young man brimming with hope, standing at the altar, convinced his love could surmount any obstacle. Sarah, a vision in a simple ivory gown, wildflowers woven into her raven hair, stood before him. The small wooden church nestled in the valley radiated the collective joy of friends and family, their faces alight with shared happiness. "You're breathtaking," he'd murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah had laughed, a sound like tinkling glass, and squeezed his hand. "Only for you, Thatcher." He recalled the vows, delivered with unflinching certainty, the promise of forever reverberating in the intimate space. He felt again her hand nestled in his during their first dance, the gentle press of her body as she leaned close, her breath a warm whisper against his neck. The return to the ranch unfolded in his mind, endless fields steeped in the golden nectar of sunset, their future a boundless beckoning horizon. The memory soured, the idyllic light replaced by the stark glare of a winter dawn. Sarah, swollen with child, her complexion pale despite the expectant glow in her eyes, awaited her delivery. Excitement hung thick in the ranch house air. Even Thatcher, usually reserved, found himself swept up in the preparations, meticulously crafting a cradle, debating names with Sarah, envisioning a son or daughter to fill their days with joy. But the serene tableau shattered with the first piercing cry of agony. The midwife arrived, her expression troubled as the hours crawled by. Thatcher paced outside the bedroom, the silence punctuated by Sarah's ragged breaths, each gasp a painful tear in the fabric of his being. He yearned to crash through the door, to absorb her suffering, but he understood he had to remain steadfast, the anchor she desperately needed. He could still hear the midwife's voice, strained and urgent. "Thatcher, come quickly." He surged into the room, the air saturated with the metallic tang of blood and the suffocating weight of fear. Sarah lay ashen and weak, her eyes wide with terror. "Thatcher," she gasped, reaching for him. "The baby." He knelt beside her, clasping her hand, his own trembling uncontrollably. Everything will be fine, Sarah. You're strong. Even as the words escaped his lips, he knew they were a hollow reassurance. He recognized the dread in the midwife's gaze, the almost imperceptible shake of her head. Hours dissolved into a harrowing eternity. The midwife toiled relentlessly, her face slick with perspiration, but the baby remained trapped, and Sarah's vitality ebbed. Thatcher could only observe, powerless, as the future he had envisioned disintegrated before his eyes. "Thatcher," Sarah whispered, her voice a bare thread, Promise me you'll find happiness." He choked back a sob, clutching her hand tighter. "I promise." Another lie, knowing that happiness was an elusive phantom he could never hope to capture. Then silence descended. The midwife straightened, her face etched with grief. "I'm so sorry, Thatcher." He stared at Sarah, her eyes now closed, her expression serene in death. The infant, a boy, lay motionless in the midwife's arms, his fragile body still. 2 lives snuffed out in a heartbeat. The world turned to ice. He recalled the primal scream that erupted from his depths, a sound of raw, unadulterated sorrow that resonated through the empty house. He remembered the weight of Sarah in his arms as he carried her to the cemetery, the frigid earth a stark reminder of the permanence of loss. He remembered standing by the freshly turned earth, the wind lashing around him, the minister's words hollow and meaningless. From that day forward, he constructed a fortress around his heart, a bastion of stone and ice designed to shield him from the pain. He threw himself into the ranch, laboring relentlessly from dawn till dusk, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion, anything to suppress the memories that plagued him. He morphed into the callous rancher everyone knew, a man devoid of affection, a man haunted by the ghosts of yesterday. The image of Lily's beaming face, her eyes sparkling with mirth as Maggie read aloud, momentarily pierced the darkness. He considered Maggie's unwavering patience, her soft touch, the way she had resurrected light within a home long steeped in shadows. He recalled the letter from Lily's orphanage, the one he had nearly consigned to the flames. He had not wanted a child, had not desired a constant reminder of all he had forfeited. But Lily had arrived, a small, vulnerable creature who had somehow managed to erode his defenses. He glanced at Maggie again, her head bowed over the book, her brow creased in concentration. He didn't comprehend her, this woman from the city, with her unconventional views and her unwavering optimism. However, he recognized she possessed something he desperately craved, the capacity to love, to heal, to move forward. Could he learn from her? Could he permit himself to feel again, to risk the agony of loss? The prospect filled him with dread, yet the alternative, a life mired in the past, was infinitely more unbearable. He levered himself from the swing, its creak echoing in the still night air. He moved toward the door, his hand reaching for the latch. It was time to confront the phantoms, not to obliterate them, but to acknowledge them, to glean wisdom from them, to allow them to lead him toward a future he had deemed impossible. He wasn't certain he was prepared, but he understood he had to make the attempt, for Lily's sake, and perhaps, just perhaps, for his own. Breaking the silence, the air in Thatcher's study clung to the senses, a musty blend of aged leather and dancing dust. The room mirrored its occupant, austere, formidable. Books, spines pristine, lined the walls, silent witnesses to a life once brimming with potential, now suffocated by sorrow. Before the imposing mahogany desk, its surface reflecting the restless firelight in her eyes, stood Maggie. The confrontation she'd initiated felt weighty, unavoidable. Thatcher, a brooding figure, regarded her with guarded intensity. "You summoned me, Miss Colton." His voice, a gravelly murmur, lacked any warmth. Maggie clasped her hands, knuckles straining. "Yes, Mr. Boone. It concerns Lily." A skeptical arch of his brow. "She's flourishing under your care. What issue could possibly arise?" "She thrives because I provide that care," Maggie retorted, her voice gaining ground. "But what of you, Mr. Boone? What do you offer her?" Thatcher's features tightened. "I provide shelter, sustenance, clothing, advantages many in this territory can only dream of. Provisions, Mr. Boone. Merely that. Lily yearns for more. She needs a father's presence." Maggie scrutinized his face, searching for a chink in his armor. Anger flickered in his gaze. "I am her uncle, not her sire. There is a distinction." "Is there truly?" "She doesn't perceive it. She looks to you with such hope, such a void to fill, and you rebuff her. You barely acknowledge her. Affection is absent. She feels like an unwelcome presence within these walls." Thatcher's fist crashed onto the desktop, the inkwell trembling, papers scattering like startled birds. "You presume too much. You are an employee, nothing more." Maggie stood firm, unyielding. "I have every justification. I cherish Lily. I witness her retreating inward, growing quieter with each passing day, echoing your own isolation. She deserves better than a withdrawn, morose guardian who cannot even offer a simple good night." "You cannot comprehend," Thatcher countered, his tone softening, edged with a pain rarely unveiled. "You simply cannot." "Then enlighten me," Maggie pressed. "Relate what occurred. Explain why you fear connection with her. Clarify why you remain chained to the past." He averted his gaze, his attention drawn to the darkened window. "It is irrelevant. It becomes relevant when Lily is affected. She endured the loss of her parents, Mr. Boone. She requires a sense of security, of love, and she won't discover it in this desolate dwelling, not while you stalk the halls like a specter yourself." Silence enveloped the room, pierced only by the fire's crackling symphony. Thatcher remained immobile, a statue hewn from grief and regret. Maggie waited, her pulse quickening, questioning if she'd overstepped. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "Sarah, my wife. She perished in childbirth. The child did not survive either." A wave of compassion washed over Maggie, extinguishing her anger. "I am deeply sorry, Mr. Boone." He turned back, his eyes reflecting a raw agony that stole her breath. "Apologies offer no solace. They do not bridge the emptiness. Each glance at Lily is a reflection of Sarah, a painful reminder of my loss. I cannot allow myself to care, because affection invites the possibility of renewed loss." "But you are not losing, Mr. Boone." "You are gaining ground. You possess the chance to forge a new existence, a new kinship. Lily requires you. And perhaps you need her as well." Maggie drew closer, her voice soothing. "You cannot persist in punishing yourself, dwelling in the shadows of what was. Sarah would not desire that for you. She would desire your happiness. Her wish would be for you to embrace Lily." Thatcher shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "I lack the capacity." "Then acquire it," Maggie urged. "Begin subtly. Recite a story. Inquire about her day. Simply be engaged. Demonstrate your concern." He considered her, his expression a conflict of fear and aspiration. "It will be arduous." "Worthwhile endeavors often are," Maggie replied gently. "But she warrants the effort, Mr. Boone." "Lily warrants the fight." He ran a hand roughly through his hair, his gaze dropping from Maggie to the floor. The silence extended, heavy with unexpressed emotions. An internal struggle playing out before her. She observed him, her heart aching, yearning for him to shatter his self-imposed confines. At last he raised his eyes, meeting hers. "Very well," he conceded, his voice raspy. "Very well, I shall endeavor." The words were spare, yet laden with promise, a beacon of hope in the gloom. Maggie felt a surge of relief, a cautious optimism taking root. The battle was not yet concluded, but the initial stride had been taken. The silence had been broken, and perhaps, just perhaps, healing could commence. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she offered, a faint smile gracing her lips. "I have faith in your ability to succeed." He nodded, his gaze still uncertain. "There is something further," he mumbled, the revelation evidently causing him pain. "Yes?" Maggie prompted with care. "The neighboring rancher Jedediah Stone, he has been nosing around, attempting to purchase pieces of my land. He is unyielding." His jaw tightened into a rigid line. Unease prickled at Maggie's skin. "And you believe this is connected to May? He has been making inquiries regarding you, regarding Lily." "Stone operates without scruples, Miss Colton. Exercise caution in his vicinity." A shiver traced Maggie's spine. This extended beyond a mere familial struggle. It was a fight for preservation, a battle for the land, for Lily, and perhaps now, for Thatcher as well. The stakes had dramatically escalated. Laughter returns. The saddle groaned softly under Thatcher as he settled Lily onto Buttercup's back. Years had passed since he'd last ridden for pleasure. Sarah's phantom laughter, echoing from forgotten races across sun-drenched fields, was his constant companion. Today, however, a different presence anchored him. A little hand clutching his own. "Easy does it, Lilybug," he murmured, his voice raspier than intended. He caught the glint of worry in her wide, azure eyes. "So reminiscent of Sarah." He softened his tone. "Just like Maggie showed you, heels down, light hands." Lily, her small brow creased in concentration, mirrored his instructions. Buttercup, sensing her rider's unease, sidestepped. "She's scared." "Uncle Thatcher," Lily breathed, barely audible above the whispering leaves. Thatcher frowned. "Buttercup? She's a sweetheart." "No," Lily replied, shaking her head, her gaze fixed on the dusty ground. "Me." He knelt, the persistent ache of loss momentarily dimmed by concern. He hadn't considered her perspective, the imposing size of the animal beneath her. "Hey," he said, gently raising her chin. "Nothing to fear. I'm right here, and Buttercup, she's got you." He walked Buttercup around the corral, Lily's grip fluctuating on the reins. Slowly, a hesitant smile blossomed. Trepidation ebbed, replaced by dawning confidence. Maggie observed from the porch, leaning against a weathered post, arms crossed. A surge of unexpected warmth coursed through her. Watching Thatcher, usually so reserved, carefully guide Lily, felt like witnessing parched earth drink in the rain. After an hour, Thatcher assisted Lily down. Her legs wobbled, but her cheeks were flushed with delight. "Again, Uncle Thatcher. Tomorrow?" He tousled her hair, a faint smile gracing his lips. "We'll see, Lilybug. We'll see." His gaze flickered to Maggie, a silent query. She returned a smile, an unspoken affirmation. The next day, Thatcher surprised them all by suggesting a picnic. Maggie packed a basket brimming with sandwiches, fruit, and Lily's beloved cookies. They settled by the river, the water shimmering under the afternoon sun. Lily's earlier shyness vanished as she chattered, pointing out darting swallows and flitting butterflies. Thatcher listened, truly listened, a novelty after years of silence. He observed the sun-kissed strands in her hair, the crinkles around her eyes when she giggled. Maggie watched, a quiet spectator, as Thatcher demonstrated how to skip stones. He showed her the proper grip, the precise wrist action. Lily shrieked with glee when a flat rock danced across the surface 3 times. "Again, Uncle Thatcher, once more." He chuckled, selecting another stone. All right, but your turn now." He repeated the demonstration, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily imitated his movements, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. Her stone landed with a dull plunk. "Ah," she sighed, her face clouding. Thatcher draped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "That's okay, Lilybug. It takes practice. Here, let me show you." He adjusted her hand, correcting her grip, his touch surprisingly tender. This time, her stone skipped twice. "I did it! I did it!" she whooped, jumping with joy. Thatcher laughed. A genuine laugh, rich and full, a sound unheard on the Iron Wheel Ranch for too long. The sound startled even him. He hadn't realized the extent to which grief had constricted him, stifling the very breath in his lungs. Lily paused, staring at him, her eyes wide. "You're laughing, Uncle Thatcher." He glanced at her, at Maggie, at the glistening river, and felt a profound shift within him. The oppressive weight began to lighten, replaced by a buoyancy he thought lost forever. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I guess I am." He ruffled Lily's hair again, pulling her into an embrace. This time, she returned the hug, her small arms squeezing tightly. Maggie's heart swelled with emotion. She glimpsed the man Thatcher could become, the man he was meant to be, capable of affection, happiness, connection. As the sun dipped low, painting long shadows across the plains, they packed the picnic basket. Thatcher carried Lily on his shoulders, her little hands clutching his hair. He walked with a newfound lightness, a purpose rekindled. Back at the house, as Maggie tucked Lily into bed, Thatcher stood framed in the doorway, watching them. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low. Maggie looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For bringing her back to life," he responded, his gaze fixed on Lily's sleeping form. "And for bringing laughter back to this house." He turned and walked away, leaving Maggie to her reflections. She understood this was merely the start. Shadows lingered, wounds remained unhealed. But for the first time since arriving at the Iron Wheel Ranch, she felt a spark of hope. Hope for Lily, hope for Thatcher, and perhaps even hope for herself. Later that night, Jedediah Stone surveyed the Iron Wheel Ranch from the crest of a hill. He observed the lamplight spilling from the windows, heard the faint echo of mirth carried on the night air. His face contorted in a grimace. He had underestimated Thatcher Boone, and that governess a greater nuisance than anticipated. He spat on the parched earth. "Their joy won't last long," he muttered to himself, before wheeling his horse around and vanishing into the inky blackness. A dance in the dust. The invitation, a stiff rectangle of cardstock, had perched on the mantel a week. A mute challenge. Town dance. Saturday night. Thatcher had studiously ignored it. Such revelry was for the carefree, not for a man shadowed by yesterday. But Lily's hopeful gaze, those wide pools of imploring innocence, had disarmed him. "Uncle Thatcher, please. Maggie says there's music and lemonade." Now, he stood in the half-light of his room, the planks beneath his boots aged and groaning softly. He fought with the recalcitrant tie, the collar a constricting band he hadn't known in years, not since he slammed the door on that memory. Only to get through the evening, satisfy Lily's whim, and retreat to the solace of his spread. That was the goal. Down the hall, Maggie waged her own battle. She faced her reflection, a stranger staring back from behind the glass. Mrs. Henderson's loan, a modest calico, yet a world apart from her own plain garb, was both a kindness and a subtle mockery. It clung in places it shouldn't, a blatant reminder of her work-worn frame. Still, she'd managed to tame her hair into a passable coil, and a touch of color enlivened her cheeks. She yearned to look presentable, not for vanity's sake, but for Lily. And perhaps a treacherous whisper suggested, for Thatcher's benefit as well. Smoothing the borrowed fabric, she steeled herself, recalling her purpose. Lily depended on her. And Thatcher, however unknowingly, needed her too. When Thatcher finally appeared, Lily vibrated with barely contained glee. Her new dress, a cloud of sky blue, made her eyes blaze. He summoned a smile, genuine enough to crinkle the corners of his eyes. "Ready to go, Squirt?" Lily's head bobbed with fervor, latching onto Maggie's hand. As Maggie entered the light, Thatcher experienced a disquieting tremor. The dress was unassuming, but on her it blossomed. The hue deepened her complexion, and the candlelight kindled sparks in her hazel irises. He averted his gaze quickly, unnerved by the unfamiliar sensations churning within. The dance hall pulsed with a raucous energy, the whine of fiddles, peals of laughter, and the insistent stomp of boots on the floorboards. Lily propelled Maggie toward the throng, joining a gaggle of children spinning and laughing with wild abandon. Thatcher remained by the wall, nursing a lemonade and regarding the scene with detached observation. He felt jarringly out of sync, a somber note in a cheerful melody. He found himself watching Maggie, her expression radiant as she circled with Lily. Her joy was contagious, pulling at him despite his resistance. He noted the tender way she encouraged Lily, her hand a gentle anchor. He saw the authentic affection in her eyes, a warmth that radiated like a sunbeam. After an exuberant reel, Lily tumbled into Maggie's embrace, gasping and giggling. "Uncle Thatcher, come dance," she begged. Thatcher demurred. He hadn't danced in an age. The prospect stirred a discomfiting mix of apprehension and dormant desire. He stole a glance at Maggie, her eyes a blend of inquiry and encouragement. He couldn't refuse Lily. Setting down his drink, he hesitantly ventured onto the floor. The music shifted to a languid waltz, and Lily, with a fleeting hug, darted off to rejoin her friends. Thatcher found himself facing Maggie, the space between them suddenly thick with unspoken currents. He cleared his throat, the sound oddly loud. I'm a bit rusty. Just let me guide," Maggie murmured, her voice barely audible above the music's swell. He placed his hand at her waist, the contact strangely comforting and real. She positioned her hand on his shoulder, and they began to sway. Thatcher was rigid at first, his movements clumsy. But Maggie was patient, her touch feather-light and reassuring. Gradually, he began to loosen, his body yielding to the rhythm. They moved in near silence, their gazes intertwined. Thatcher perceived a profoundness in Maggie's stare that both captivated and alarmed him. He saw kindness, empathy, and something more, something mirroring the emotions burgeoning inside him. He felt an attraction, an invisible tether drawing him inexorably toward her. He longed to unburden himself of the desolation that had been his constant companion, to confess the regret and the sorrow that still plagued his nights. He wanted to convey how her presence had rekindled a flicker of hope, how Lily's laughter had become a welcome symphony. But the words remained trapped, stifled by years of quiet despair. As they circled, Thatcher spotted Jedediah Stone standing near the doorway, his eyes sharpened with a predatory glint. He scrutinized them with open malice, his gaze lingering on Maggie with a disturbing fixity. Thatcher's grip on Maggie's waist tightened almost imperceptibly, a protective impulse surging through him. The waltz concluded, and Thatcher abruptly retreated, shattering the fragile spell. "Thank you," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "I should probably see how Lily's doing." He spun away, leaving Maggie adrift on the dance floor, her expression a tapestry of disappointment and understanding. She sensed he was wrestling with an internal struggle, fighting phantoms invisible to her. She could only pray that someday he'd allow her to help him prevail. Thatcher discovered Lily immersed in play near the refreshment stand. He manufactured a smile and tousled her hair. "Having a blast, Squirt?" "The best time ever!" she squealed, her eyes luminous. He observed her antics, his heart aching with a yearning he couldn't quite articulate. He craved the mirth, the elation, the sensation of belonging. Yet, fear held him captive. Fear of exposing himself again. Fear of suffering another catastrophic loss. He glanced back at Maggie. She was engaged in conversation with Mrs. Henderson, her smile faintly strained. He registered the hawkish gaze of Jedediah Stone upon her, his eyes like a serpent poised to strike. He knew he had to intervene. He wouldn't allow Stone to prey on her. He wouldn't tolerate anyone inflicting harm upon her. Though what action could he take? He saw himself as nothing more than a ruined man, shackled to the past. He had nothing of value to offer her, nothing to offer anyone. As the evening progressed, Thatcher lingered on the edges, a silent sentinel. He watched Maggie, his soul writhing with a blend of longing and dread. He recognized that he was succumbing to her allure, irrevocably drawn to her, but he also recognized that he must resist. He was unworthy of her regard. He was too tainted, too irrevocably broken. He observed Jedediah Stone approach Maggie, his tone honeyed and persuasive. Maggie listened with forced politeness, but Thatcher discerned the disquiet in her expression. He felt an urge to charge forward, to shield her from Stone's unwelcome advances. But he remained rooted to the spot, immobilized by his own insecurities. Eventually, the music faded, signaling the end of the night. Lily, utterly spent but content, nestled against Thatcher as they trudged toward the wagon. Maggie trailed behind, her footsteps resonating in the tranquil night air. During the ride home, Thatcher was haunted by the feeling that he stood at a pivotal juncture. He could persist in his solitary sorrow, or he could gamble on the possibility of affection and happiness. The decision rested with him, but he knew, with unwavering certainty, that the answer resided within the eyes of the woman with whom he had danced in the dust. Whispers of Stone, the rhythmic drumming of hooves from the corral was a harsh counterpoint to the disquiet festering within Thatcher. He observed Caleb and young Billy as they struggled to maneuver a recalcitrant mare into a makeshift enclosure. The air, sharp with sage and the cool tang of upturned soil, did little to alleviate the premonition that had dogged him since the community dance. "Stone's been nosing around again," Caleb drawled, punctuating the statement with a brown stream aimed at the parched earth. "Inquiring about grazing rights on the North 40. Claims his herd's outgrown his spread. Thatcher's jaw hardened. That land's been in the Boone family since dirt. Stone knows better. Anxious to impress, Billy piped up. Heard Hemlock at the Mercantile say Stone was poking into the Iron Wheel's accounts, too. Hinted things were looking grim since... He faltered, his gaze flickering nervously toward Thatcher. Thatcher's voice cut him off. Since I buried my wife and son? Spit it out, Billy. The vultures had been circling since the day it happened. He leaned against the rough-hewn corral, the wood biting into his back. The absence of Clara and Thomas remained a cauterized wound, and the thought of Stone leveraging their memory for his own gain ignited a cold fury in his veins. Just sayin', Thatcher, Caleb soothed, his tone conciliatory. Stone's got his eye on this place. Always has. Doesn't mean anything's set in stone. Just gotta stay sharp. Thatcher straightened, a familiar glint returning to his eyes. Wouldn't have it any other way. Stone's all bluster. More wind than substance. He waved a dismissive hand, but the words left a bitter taste. He knew Stone intimately. The man was patient, calculating, and fiercely ambitious. He'd bide his time, waiting for a guaranteed advantage. Unseen, Maggie tended her small herb garden near the bunkhouse. Whispers of their exchange carried on the breeze, leaving her with a colder feeling than the autumn air warranted. Her grip tightened on the trowel, knuckles bone white. The ranch represented more than mere acreage to Thatcher, she understood. It was his heritage, interwoven with his very being. And Stone, motivated by greed and subtle threats, was circling with ill intentions. As Thatcher turned toward the main house, Maggie approached. The rising sun illuminated her auburn hair, framing her face with a soft glow. He couldn't miss the concern etched into her features. I couldn't help overhearing, she began, her tone quiet but firm. What Caleb and Billy were saying about Mr. Stone, is it true? Is he trying to take the ranch? Thatcher sighed, raking a hand through his hair. He was reluctant to burden her, especially given their burgeoning connection. It's just talk, Maggie. Stone's always coveted the Iron Wheel. Enjoys flexing his muscles, trying to intimidate people. But you don't sound convinced, she persisted, her gaze unwavering. You're worried, aren't you? He hesitated, the falsehood lodging in his throat. Deception was a poor substitute for the vulnerability he'd shared at the dance. "Oh, right," he admitted, his voice dropping. "Maybe I am a little concerned. Stone's not a man to underestimate, but I can handle him, always have." Maggie closed the space between them, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. The warmth of her touch was like a spark, a welcome distraction from the encroaching apprehension. "Thatcher, this isn't just about you. It's about Lily, about the future you're building here. You can't simply dismiss this as idle chatter. You need to be vigilant." He covered her hand with his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "I will be. I promise you, Maggie. I won't allow anything to happen to this ranch, or to you, or Lily." The sincerity in his tone seemed to allay some of her anxiety, but he could still discern a hint of doubt in her gaze. "What is it, Maggie?" he questioned softly. "It's Justy," she trailed off, searching for the appropriate words. He regarded me strangely at the dance. There was something unsettling in his eyes, almost possessive. Thatcher's grip tightened on her hand. The protective urge he'd been suppressing surged to the forefront, intensified by a surge of raw anger. "He won't lay a hand on you, Maggie. I won't permit it." The words were a solemn pledge, one he intended to honor, regardless of the consequences. He released her hand, his expression hardening. "I need to ride into town, talk to Hemlock myself, see what else he's gleaned." Be careful, Thatcher, she cautioned, her voice tinged with worry. Don't allow him to provoke you. I won't, he responded, uncertain he could keep that promise. Stone had crossed a boundary when he looked at Maggie with such possessiveness. Mounting his horse, the familiar weight of the saddle offered a sense of stability. As he guided the animal out of the corral, he cast a glance back at Maggie, bathed in sunlight, her face a study in anxiety and determination. He recognized that he was fighting for far more than the iron wheel now. He was fighting for her, for Lily, for the tentative promise of a life he hadn't dared to envision. The ride to town passed in a haze of dust and mounting indignation. The memory of Stone's leering gaze burned in his mind, fueling his ire. He reached Hemlock's Mercantile, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. The establishment was stocked with the usual staples: flour, textiles, implements, and the pervading scent of cured tobacco. Old man Hemlock, perched behind the counter, peered over his spectacles, startled by the entrance. Thatcher, didn't anticipate seeing you in town so soon after the celebration. Stone, Thatcher stated flatly, bypassing pleasantries. I understand he's been asking questions. Hemlock sighed, adjusting his spectacles. Nothing stays buried in this town, does it? Stone's been around, inquiring about your finances, about the ranch, suggested you might be inclined to sell. And what was your reply? Thatcher pressed, his voice carrying a veiled threat. Hemlock shrugged. Told him I was unaware of your affairs. However, I did mention that things haven't been particularly easy for you since, well, you know. Thatcher's fist clenched involuntarily. He knew Hemlock intended no malice, but the reminder of past misfortunes was a painful prick. Anything else? Just that he seemed particularly intrigued by the new governess, Hemlock divulged, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. Asked about her origins, her disposition, remarked on her beauty. That was the final provocation, the turning point. Thatcher slammed his fist against the counter, sending tremors through the surrounding jars and a shiver down Hemlock's spine. Tell Stone to keep his distance from her. Tell him to stay away from my ranch. Tell him if he so much as glances in her direction again, he'll answer to me. He spun on his heel and stormed out of the Mercantile, the bell clanging above the doorway like a dire warning. The murmurs regarding Stone had escalated into a deafening roar, and Thatcher understood that a tempest was brewing. His only hope was to weather it without forfeiting everything he held precious. Rivals gaze a plume of dust billowed on the horizon, an ominous stain spreading across the cerulean canvas of the sky. Thatcher, mending fences along the north pasture, straightened, his jaw a rigid line. The silhouette was unmistakable, a garish, chroma-laden behemoth, a jarring intrusion on the rustic vista. Jedediah Stone. He spat, a silent curse etched in the parched earth. He hadn't anticipated Stone's gall, his early return after their clash at Hemlock's. The man's nerve was astonishing. Drawn by the approaching rumble, Maggie emerged from the ranch house, Lily glued to her side like a shadow. The little girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity, shadowed by a trace of unease in Maggie's. Thatcher knew Stone's reputation preceded him, a man who seized what he desired. The car braked with a screech, its polished surfaces flashing sunlight like a taunt. Stone unfolded from the vehicle, a predatory grace in his movements. Handsome, yes, but charm was a fragile mask, stretched over a core of frigid calculation. His bespoke suit, a stark contrast to Thatcher's worn denim, amplified the chasm between their lives. Boone, Stone purred, his voice a silken drawl laced with steel. I do hope I'm not disturbing you. Thatcher's stare didn't waver, his face a mask of granite. You are. Stone's low chuckle scraped at Thatcher's resolve. Such warmth. I came to propose a mutually advantageous arrangement. Concerning your water rights. Thatcher's fists clenched at his sides. There's nothing to discuss. My water isn't for sale. Stone's smile lacked warmth. Everything has a price, Boone. You simply haven't discovered yours. His gaze shifted, lingering on Maggie and Lily with unsettling curiosity. And who are these charming ladies? Maggie moved forward, shielding Lily. I am Miss Colton, Mr. Stone, Lily's governess. Stone's eyes swept over Maggie, a slow, deliberate appraisal that ignited a firestorm in Thatcher's veins. A governess? How fascinating. A woman of such refinement in this untamed setting. He stepped closer, his voice a low, suggestive murmur. Do you find life here enriching, Miss Colton? Or perhaps isolating? Thatcher surged forward, interposing himself between Stone and Maggie. Miss Colton is under my protection. I suggest you remember that. His voice, a low growl, vibrated with warning. Stone raised his hands in feigned surrender. No need for aggression, Boone. I merely appreciate beauty. Perhaps Miss Colton might enjoy a drive? I could show her the sights. I imagine opportunities for diversion are limited out here. Maggie's chin lifted, defiance glinting in her eyes. I am quite content here, Mr. Stone. I appreciate the offer. Thatcher glimpsed a sliver of relief in her eyes, quickly concealed by her composure. He knew Stone's presence had unsettled her, despite her valiant front. A pity, Stone said, his smile now a sharpened edge. Perhaps you'll reconsider. I can be persuasive. He turned back to Thatcher. As for the water rights, Boone, don't be hasty. Fortunes can shift. He paused, his gaze encompassing the ranch house, the outbuildings, the land, with a possessive air. Things have a way of vanishing. He slid back into his car, the engine erupting with a guttural roar. As he sped away, he leaned out, his words carried on the breeze. Consider it, Boone. Carefully. Thatcher watched him disappear, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were bone white. He turned to Maggie, his expression softening. Are you all right? Maggie nodded, her face pale. I'm fine. Just as shaken. He's a menacing man. He won't trouble you again. Thatcher swore, his voice ringing with resolve. I won't leave him. He knelt beside Lily, who stared after the departing vehicle with wide eyes. His rough hand gently smoothed her hair. Everything's fine, Lilybug. Mr. Stone was just leaving. He stood, his gaze sweeping over the ranch, the land he had watered with his labor and his heart. It was no longer solely about the land. It was about Maggie, about Lily, about the fragile family they had begun to build. Stone wished to seize it, to extinguish the ember of hope that had ignited in the desolate landscape of his heart, and Thatcher would not permit it. He looked at Maggie, his eyes searching hers. I need to go into town. I have business to attend to. Maggie nodded, understanding lighting her eyes. Be careful, Thatcher. He managed a tight smile. Always. But as he rode off, the wind whipping around him, he knew this was different. He wasn't just fighting for the iron wheel. He was fighting for something infinitely more precious, something deeper than pride or property. He was fighting for his family. Protective instincts, the dust billowed behind Thatcher as he rode toward town. The image of Jedediah Stone's greasy smile burned into his mind. He pictured Maggie's face, the way her eyes widened slightly when Stone had addressed her with that unsettling familiarity. A knot tightened in his gut, a possessive anger he hadn't felt in years. He told himself it was about protecting Lily, about shielding her from the ugliness Stone represented, but he knew a deeper, more primal instinct was at play. He found Stone at the saloon, nursing a whiskey and holding court with a couple of men who looked like they'd sell their own mothers for $1. Thatcher strode in, the bat-wing doors swinging shut behind him with a resounding crack that silenced the room. He walked directly to Stone, his spurs clicking against the wooden floor. The air crackled with unspoken animosity. "Stone," Thatcher said, his voice low and dangerous. "A word." Stone raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Boone. Always a pleasure. Buy you a drink?" "Save it," Thatcher growled. He leaned in close, his gaze locking with Stone's. "Stay away from Maggie. Stay away from my ranch." Stone chuckled. A low, rumbling sound. "Now, Thatcher, that ain't neighborly. The lady seems perfectly capable of making her own decisions. And as for your ranch, well, let's just say I admire your tenacity." Thatcher's hand tightened into a fist. He wanted to wipe that smug look off Stone's face, but he knew violence wouldn't solve anything. "Not yet, anyway. Consider this a warning, Stone. You cross me, you'll regret it." He straightened up, his eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to interfere. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Stone and his cronies in a stunned silence. Back at the ranch, the scent of lavender and something baking filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that had been building inside him all day. He found Maggie in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a bowl. Lily was at the table, carefully drawing in a coloring book. The sight calmed him, but only slightly. "He was here again, wasn't he?" Thatcher asked, his voice tight. Maggie turned, her brow furrowing. "Jedediah?" "Yes, he stopped by. He was persistent about discussing water rights with you." "He wasn't just here for water rights," Thatcher said, his jaw clenching. Maggie placed the bowl on the counter and wiped her hands on her apron. "Thatcher, I can handle myself. I've dealt with men like Jedediah before." "Not like him, you haven't," Thatcher retorted, his voice sharper than he intended. "He's got a way of getting under your skin." Maggie's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you saying I'm not capable of seeing through him?" "I'm saying I don't want him anywhere near you or Lily," Thatcher said, softening his tone slightly. He reached out and took her hand, his touch rough but gentle. "I'm just trying to protect you." "I appreciate that, Thatcher. I truly do," Maggie said, pulling her hand away. "But I'm not some fragile flower that needs protecting. I'm a grown woman, and I can make my own decisions. This isn't just about you," Thatcher countered. "It's about Lily. Stone is a dangerous man, and I won't let him put her at risk." "And you think hovering over me like a hawk is going to keep her safe?" Maggie asked, her voice rising. "It's stifling, Thatcher. I feel like I'm living in a cage." Thatcher stepped back, stung by her words. He hadn't realized his protectiveness was coming across as controlling. "I didn't mean to—" "I know you didn't," Maggie interrupted, her voice softer now, "but you have to trust me." "Thatcher, I can take care of myself, and I won't let anything happen to Lily either." "It's just I care about you both," Thatcher said, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "More than I thought possible." Maggie looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I care about you too, Thatcher. But caring doesn't mean controlling. It means trusting." The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by Lily's quiet humming. Thatcher knew Maggie was right, but letting go of control was a terrifying prospect. He had spent so long building walls around himself, around his ranch, around his heart. Now, those walls were crumbling, and he wasn't sure he was ready to face the world outside. "I'll try," Thatcher said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll try to trust you." Maggie nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "That's all I ask." She turned back to her baking, the tension in the room easing slightly. But Thatcher knew this was just the beginning. Jedediah Stone wasn't going to back down easily, and Thatcher would have to find a way to protect his newfound family without smothering them in the process. He watched Maggie, the soft light illuminating her face, and realized that the woman he had once seen as an inconvenience was now the anchor he desperately needed. He had to find a way to be the man she deserved, the man Lily needed. And he had to do it without losing himself in the process. The task felt impossible, but for Maggie and Lily, he was willing to try. Shadows of sabotage, the first sign, whispered of trouble. A snapped fence line easily written off as the work of roaming livestock or a crafty predator, but Jedediah Stone thrived on subtlety. Young Billy, barely dry behind the ears as ranch hands went, discovered the damage a precise severance that struck Thatcher as calculated. "Fix it, Billy," Thatcher ordered, his tone sharp, "and keep your eyes peeled. Anything out of the ordinary, you come straight to me." He left unsaid the suspicion coiling in his gut, thick as the prairie dust swirling around their boots. From the porch, Maggie watched the exchange, a disquieting premonition settling over her. The broken fence felt like more than just happenstance. An oppressive stillness blanketed the ranch. Later, the insidious attack came via the water supply. The cattle, usually clamoring for the spring-fed trough, shunned it, their mournful bellows echoing through the valley. An aged cow, typically hale and hearty, stood gaunt and listless, her breathing ragged. Thatcher's face hardened as he examined the water. Dipping a finger in, he tasted it, his expression clouding over. "Something's fouled it," he growled. He dispatched the ranch hands to reroute the herd to the reserve. Well, ordering someone to fetch Doc Harris. Maggie, watching the chaotic movements, felt a chill crawl down her spine. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, she approached the well. The water's surface gleamed under the sun, yet it lacked its usual crystalline purity, reflecting a faint, greasy film. Kneeling, she gingerly cupped some in her hand, bringing it to her nose. A subtle, coppery tang stung her nostrils. That evening, after Lily-Ark was tucked in, Maggie found Thatcher hunched over ranch maps in the study, worry lines deeply etched into his face by the lamplight. He seemed burdened by the weight of the land. "Thatcher," she began tentatively, "about the water." His eyes, usually open, were guarded. Harris confirmed it. "Contaminant of some sort. He suspects foul play." Maggie nodded grimly. "I agree. I detected a metallic scent. And the fence. Its break seemed too clean to be accidental." He sighed, raking a hand through his already unruly hair. "Stone," he spat, the name dripping with animosity. "He's trying to bleed me dry." "Why?" Maggie questioned, though she suspected the answer. "He covets iron wheel. Always has," Thatcher stated flatly. "He believes that by making life unbearable, I'll capitulate, sell out." "You won't, will you?" Maggie asked, her voice hushed. Thatcher met her gaze, his expression an enigma. "No," he declared, his voice resolute. "I won't." Maggie moved closer, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Then we need to anticipate his moves, understand what he intends next." Sleep remained a distant shore for Maggie that night. She thrashed in bed, the day's events playing on repeat. The splintered fence, the poisoned water, the ailing herd, all symptoms of a calculated assault. An attempt to bring Iron Wheel to its knees. Rising before the sun crested the horizon, she dressed in haste. Stealthily moving through the quiet house, an idea began to crystallize. She needed to survey the ranch, seeking some anomaly, some overlooked detail that might illuminate Stone's machinations. As the first glimmer of dawn painted the sky, Maggie saddled Belle, a gentle mare familiar with the terrain and unflappable. The vast expanse of the ranch unfurled before her as she rode, a landscape both breathtaking and unforgiving. She began at the southern border, nearest to Stone's Shadow Creek Ranch, scanning diligently for signs of intrusion, any disrupted earth or errant tracks. Hours bled into one another beneath the relentless sun. While she discovered nothing concrete, the oppressive feeling persisted. The very land seemed to be holding its breath. Returning towards the main house, a glint of reflected light caught her eye. Partially hidden among the rocks bordering the creek was a fragment of metal, corroded, yet recognizable. It was a piece of a water pump, of the variety utilized to draw water from the stream, and it had been purposefully destroyed. Anger flared within her. This extended beyond mere property or wealth. This was a personal vendetta. She retrieved the shard, gripping it tightly. As she mounted Belle, her gaze swept the landscape, searching for any indication of Stone or his henchmen. The only sounds were the chirping insects and the faint bellows of cattle. But Maggie had an intuitive certainty they were being observed. Spurring Belle forward, she rode towards the ranch house, resolved to expose the truth and safeguard the family she had come to cherish. As twilight descended, bathing the sky in fiery hues, Maggie revealed her discovery to Thatcher. She placed the broken metal fragment on the table, watching as his features tightened. "Found it by the creek," she stated, her voice controlled. "Someone deliberately wrecked the water pump." Thatcher lifted the twisted metal, examining it closely. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "He's escalating," he muttered, his tone laced with menace. "Trying to break my spirit." "He won't," Maggie said, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "We won't allow it." Thatcher looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. "We?" he echoed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Maggie nodded, covering his hand with her own. "We," she confirmed. "We are in this together." A silent promise passed between them. Their relationship had shifted, evolving beyond employer and employee to allies, united by shared purpose and budding affection. Together, they would confront the challenges ahead. Yet, as darkness deepened, Maggie could not shake the dread that the shadows of sabotage were closing in, threatening to consume them all. Unveiling to seat the air near the breached fence still reeked of blood and sheared metal. Maggie knelt, her fingertips exploring the ragged Gashiza brutal counterpoint to the clean slice of proper wirework. This wasn't mere damage, it was a deliberate act of malice. Frustration needled her. Stone had to be behind it, she felt it in her bones, but conviction wasn't evidence. Her gaze swept the parched earth, a meticulous grid. The sun, a forge overhead, baked the land to powder, each step puffing a small dust cloud. Then a sparkle caught her eye, a shard of metal glinting in the dirt. She unearthed a broken piece from the sabotaged cutter. Embedded in the grip, almost swallowed by grime, was a brand, a roughly etched J.S. Jedediah Stone. Her pulse quickened. Circumstantial, yes, but a start. It solidified her determination. She needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed. The metal fragment, swaddled in cloth, found a home in her saddlebag. Her next move was a long shot. She'd caught whispers in town, tales of Stone's heartlessness, how he chewed through men and discarded them like spent tobacco. A former employee, steeped in bitterness, might be willing to talk. She pointed her horse towards the town's edge, to the rusty spur, a saloon drowning in stale beer and regret. She found him instantly, a figure hunched over a table, drowning his sorrows in whiskey, his face a roadmap of hard living. Silas. The description matched. She approached, her voice low but firm. Silas? He lifted bloodshot eyes, suspicion clouding his gaze. Who wants to know? Maggie Colton. I'm staying at Boone's place, the Iron Wheel. A hardness crept into his expression. Boone? That ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm trying to understand something about Stone, about his methods. She settled into the chair across from him. His eyes narrowed with a flicker of interest. Mean. Filthy. He acts like he owns everything from here to kingdom come. Did he ever ask you to cross a line? To do something that might harm someone? Silas hesitated, his gaze skittering around the room. Look, lady, I ain't looking for trouble. Stone's got a long reach. I know, but bullies only thrive in the dark. What did he want you to do, Silas? Urgency threaded her words. He sighed, the sound a weary exhalation. He suggested Boone's cattle might stray. Said Boone was getting too big for his britches. And something about the well, making it look less appealing. Did you do it? Shame painted Silas's face as he looked away. I did some. Not the water, couldn't stomach that. But the cattle I needed the money, family to feed. And then? Then he fired me. Said I didn't have the stomach for it. Paid me a pittance. Left me in the dust. Maggie nodded, her mind racing. This was it. Silas, would you testify to this? To tell someone what he asked you to do? Fear warred with resentment in his eyes. Testify? Against Stone? Lady, you're asking me to write my own obituary. He shook his head vehemently. I can't, just can't. Maggie understood. She couldn't push him. But it was enough. She thanked him, slipping a few dollars into his calloused hand, and left the saloon, the weight of her knowledge heavy on her shoulders. The return ride felt endless. The setting sun stretched long skeletal shadows across the land, cloaking the familiar scenery in a menacing pall. Thatcher paced the porch when she arrived, his face etched with worry and impatience. Where were you? His voice held an edge. Investigating, she stated, dismounting. He arched a brow. Investigating? What's that supposed to signify? I think I know who is behind the attacks, Thatcher. She approached him, her gaze steady. He crossed his arms. Oh, you do you? Inquiring minds want to know. Fairies? Gnomes? Jedediah Stone. A harsh bark of laughter escaped Thatcher. Stone? Don't be absurd. He's a businessman, not some back-alley thug. He's more than a businessman, Thatcher. He's ruthless. He wants your land, and he'll stop at nothing to get it. And you deduce this how? Consulting a crystal ball? His skepticism was a palpable barrier. Maggie inhaled deeply, fighting down her rising frustration. I found this. She retrieved the cloth-wrapped medal from her saddlebag, presenting it to him. His brand is on it. Faint, but visible. Thatcher's scrutiny was intense, his expression tightening. That proves nothing. Anyone could have planted it. I also spoke to Silas, a former ranch hand. He confessed that Stone ordered him to drive off your cattle and poison the water supply. Thatcher's face remained impassive, a mask of doubt. Silas is a drunkard. He'd say anything for a shot of whiskey. He was scared, Thatcher, petrified of Stone, but he told me the truth. I know it. Her voice was unwavering, pleading. Thatcher studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. He saw it, the conviction, the unyielding spirit that mirrored his own, buried beneath layers of cynicism. He finally spoke, his tone softer, edged with uncertainty. Even if you're right, what can we do? It's his word against mine. And Stone has friends in all the right places. We gather more proof. We unmask him for who he is. We don't let him win, Thatcher. This is your home. It's Lily's home. And it's becoming my home, too. Her words lingered, a quiet promise, a shared vulnerability. Thatcher looked at her, truly saw her, and for the first time, he saw not just a governess, but a partner, an ally, someone willing to stand with him, with his family, for his land. A spark of something new ignited within him, hope, trust. He met her gaze, the skepticism receding, replaced by a nascent resolve. "All right, Maggie," he conceded, his voice low. "All right. Let's see what we can uncover." The Iron Wheel Ranch wasn't only his burden now. It was theirs. And Jedediah Stone was about to discover what that meant. Confessions and Confrontations lantern light stretched shadows across the worn map on Thatcher's desk. Maggie's weathered finger traced the broken fence line, Stone's brazen act of vandalism. "He's turning the screws, Thatcher." The fence was a first strike. Silas's convenient silence a blatant threat. He intends to drive us out. Thatcher leaned back, the chair groaning in protest. The pieces clicked into place, a pattern Maggie had meticulously assembled. He'd been blinded by pride, convinced of his lone wolf capabilities. This transcended mere cattle thieving or tempestuous weather. This was a man wholly consumed by his desires, and Iron Wheel, it seemed, was only a stepping stone toward possessing Maggie. A glacial dread seized Thatcher's insides. He truly saw her then, the lamplight gilding auburn strands, the resolute curve of her jaw, the indomitable spirit blazing in her gaze. How could he have been so obtuse, oblivious to Stone's schemes, and, more significantly, to the gradual warmth that had melted the glacial fortress around his heart? "You were right," he conceded, the words stiff and unfamiliar. "About Stone. About everything." A pause, then a plunge. "And about me." Maggie's expression softened, concern etching her features. "Thatcher." He rose, bridging the space between them. His hand hovered, then gently cradled her cheek. Her skin, silken and delicate, contrasted sharply with the calloused grit of his own. I've been a ghost these past years. Grief, it calcifies a man, turns him fragile. I know," she breathed. You've changed all that, Maggie. You and Lily. You've rekindled the hearth in this house. In my life," he swallowed, emotion constricting his throat. "I love you, Maggie. I resisted it with every fiber. But I do. I love you." The confession lingered, heavy with unspoken truths. Maggie's eyes widened, surprise mingling with a nascent joy. She covered his hand with her own. "Thatcher," she whispered, her voice catching on the name. Before she could elaborate, a horse's high-pitched whinny sliced through the stillness, followed by the ominous rumble of a speeding wagon. Too fast, by far. Thatcher's head snapped up, senses prickling with alert. He snuffed the lantern, plunging the room into inky blackness. "Stay put," he commanded, his voice a low rasp. "Something's terribly wrong." He snatched his rifle from the wall rack and melted into the night. A sliver of moon offered scant illumination. Rounding the corner of the house, he saw the tableau. Jedediah Stone and 2 henchmen, their faces like granite, their intent unmistakable. They were hauling Maggie from the small cabin she shared with Lily. Lily stood sentinel on the porch, a tiny, terrified silhouette against the doorway, her cries stolen by the wind. A rage, frigid and all-consuming, flooded Thatcher. He raised his rifle, then hesitated, a grim choice. Risking Maggie was unthinkable. "Stone!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the yard. Stone halted, pivoting to face him, a cruel smirk twisting his features. Maggie was a captive held tight, his arm a suffocating band around her. "Well, well, Boone, what a pleasant surprise. I was merely borrowing your property." "Release her, Stone," Thatcher growled, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Not a ghost of a chance," Stone sneered. "I'm here to propose a deal, Boone. An offer you can't refuse. Iron Wheel. Sign it over, and the pretty governess goes scot-free. Refuse, and, well, accidents happen, don't they?" He tightened his hold on Maggie, eliciting a sharp intake of breath from her. Thatcher's heart hammered against his ribs. He couldn't relinquish Iron Wheel, the legacy of his family. Yet, neither could he allow Stone to harm Maggie or Lily. "Think it through, Boone," Stone pressed, eyes glinting with avarice. "Yolanda or her life?" Thatcher's mind raced, seeking a lifeline. Negotiation with Stone was futile. He'd renege on any promise. He needed to shift the balance. A glance at Lily, her small face a mask of terror, fueled his resolve. He couldn't falter in her eyes. He had to be strong, for them both. He lowered the rifle a fraction, simulating surrender. "All right, Stone," he conceded, his voice betraying none of his turmoil. "You win. I'll sign the deed. Just let Maggie go." Stone's smile broadened, a predatory expression. "Wise choice, Boone. Very wise." He nodded to one of his men, who dismounted and approached Thatcher with a document and pen. As the man drew closer, Thatcher acted. With blinding speed, he dropped the rifle and lunged, sending the man sprawling. He seized the pen and, in one fluid motion, plunged it into the man's hand. The man shrieked, dropping the document. Thatcher spun, recovering his rifle. Stone, caught off guard, stumbled backward, momentarily loosening his grip on Maggie. "Lily, run!" Thatcher roared. Lily, comprehending instantly, bolted off the porch toward the barn. Stone, regaining his composure, shoved Maggie towards his other man and drew his own weapon. "You rue this, Boone," he bellowed, firing a shot that buzzed past Thatcher's ear. Thatcher returned fire, forcing Stone to dive for cover behind the wagon. The other man, still reeling from Thatcher's initial attack, struggled to subdue Maggie. She fought with furious intensity, kicking and clawing, her spirit unbent. Thatcher exploited the chaos. He circled the wagon, using it as a shield, his gaze locked on Stone. He had to end this now, decisively. He saw his opening. Stone, momentarily exposed, raised his weapon. Thatcher fired, the bullet finding its mark in Stone's arm. Stone howled, his gun clattering to the ground. Thatcher didn't hesitate. He charged, tackling Stone to the dirt. They grappled, exchanging brutal blows, the air thick with dust and desperation. Thatcher, fueled by adrenaline and a primal need to protect Maggie and Lily, gained the advantage. He pinned Stone beneath him, his fist cocked. "It's finished, Stone," Thatcher snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. "Vacate my land and never return." Stone, defeated and bleeding, spat at Thatcher's feet. "This isn't over, Boone," he hissed. "I'll be back." "No, you won't," Thatcher said, his voice like chipped ice. He signaled to his ranch hands, who had finally arrived, roused by the gunshots. "Take him away." His men hauled Stone and his cronies away, leaving Thatcher standing alone in the enveloping darkness. He turned to Maggie, who was being comforted by Lily. He rushed to her side, relief washing over him in a tidal wave. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice laced with raw concern. Maggie shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm all right," she said, her hand reaching to touch his face. "Thanks to you." He pulled her close, burying his face in the fragrant silk of her hair. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked down at Lily, who clung tightly to Maggie. He enfolded her in his arms as well, completing a circle of love and protection. "We're safe now," he said, his voice resonating with newfound hope. "We're safe, and we're together." Holding them close, he knew he would sacrifice anything to safeguard them. He had found his family, and he would never relinquish them. Iron Wheel Ranch would stand secure, their sanctuary. And looking into Maggie's eyes, he saw a future brimming with affection, laughter, and a joy he had long believed unattainable. He was no longer a desolate rancher, hardened by grief. Maggie and Lily had kindled a flame in his soul, a flame he vowed to protect for all eternity.